So Ruben Amorim starts his Manchester United career at the weekend, Ipswich Town away. It's been an interesting appointment because obviously Erik ten Hag was removed from his position less than 6 months after signing a new contract. So, Rob, Ruben Amorim, how did it come about? Were you surprised?
Not surprised. Obviously, Ten Hag was in charge of a team that was failing. You can't have a Man United team that's 13th in the Premier League, so not surprised that he was sacked. A little bit surprised possibly that it was Amorim. There's a number of reasons for that. Obviously, he had a release clause at Sporting Lisbon that was within reach. Everyone will know that United are struggling financially, so that was one of the considerations. He's also been told that it's his job to get the best out of the squad that he's going to inherit. There's not going to be money to splash the cash in January or next summer or even beyond that. So he's been very much told that it's his job to get more out of the squad that he's already got. They thought there was a chance of getting him out of Sporting Lisbon mid-season. Obviously, he's been on record, I think, of saying that it's not his ideal situation, that he would have preferred to stay with Sporting for the rest of the season, have a pre-season, and then go into what is a massive job and a massive step up for him.
I mean, one thing that United have been sensitive about is suggesting that the Tottenham game was the game they decided to sack Ten Hag. They lost 3-0 to Tottenham, I think, end of September. What I was told, and I think you've had the same message as well, was that rather than that was the day they decided to sack Ten Hag, that was the day that they realised that they had to look at other options. So it's kind of a bit of semantics there, but they hoped that he could turn it around. I think he had 5 games after that. They hoped that they could resolve the situation and they would see some progress. But those 4 or 5 games afterwards, there was no progress. So the groundwork that they started laying began after the Tottenham defeat, when they were basically played off the pitch by Tottenham, and Ten Hag suggested it was all because Bruno Fernandes was sent off, which obviously made a difference end of the first half. But by that point, United could have been 3-0 down anyway. So the moves were put in place then, and Amorim pretty quickly became the favoured choice. But I mean, James, you might have a better feel for this, but I do know that Thomas Tuchel was somebody they considered very strongly this summer. He was on the list again this time, but did the FA outflank United by moving quickly for Tuchel, or was he never going to go to United?
Well, there was certainly a feeling within the FA that they didn't want to risk losing Tuchel by waiting any longer. I think the FA looked at Pep Guardiola in August. They spoke to him. There are conflicting messages about whether they actually offered him the job. I think there's maybe some truth in that, and I think Guardiola probably told him at the time, "Look, this isn't a no, but I can't give you an answer now. I don't know what my future holds." And they began assessing their other options, of which Tuchel was very high on the list. They were very clear publicly about the job spec for the England job, it being, they wanted a proven winner who had, trophy winning success and knew the English game, and that massively reduces the pool down to a handful of people anyway. And I think there was a feeling that come October or late September, early October, when obviously things were deteriorating at United, that the FA felt, well, if we're going to go and get Thomas Tuchel, we need to do this now. And I think they went back to Guardiola and sort of said, is there any change in your position? They didn't feel that there was, so they felt, well, we need to act now before we risk losing a top candidate.
I mean, United seemed to move slowly on Ten Hag, but then they moved quickly, So I think it was fair to criticise United for letting Ten Hag drift on when, first of all, you could say they shouldn't have given a new contract in the summer. But having done that, having removed him at the time, it was clear they had a clear plan for Amorim. There was no messing about it. It was within 24 hours we knew that Amorim was the guy and that he wanted to come and that a deal was on the verge of being done. So that was down to Omar Barada, Dan Ashworth and Jason Wilcox identifying it and going after a guy who, to be honest, Liverpool looked at, Barcelona looked at, Bayern Munich looked at last season, West Ham, we know, I'm not sure that was ever a goer, but they were in the frame as well. So they've got a guy that a lot of people wanted.
Yeah, and I think they probably deserve credit for the way they've gone about that, because they've obviously decided, like you say, after that Spurs game that Ten Hag moving forward wasn't their guy. I think they probably had those discussions in that October break and really decided that they were going to go out and see who else was available. They've gone and done their due diligence around a few different candidates, not Tuchel clearly because he was already signed on with England, but managers like Thomas Frank, Terzic, who was at Borussia Dortmund, all those kind of guys they looked at. They've obviously landed on Amorim. At that point then, timing becomes a bit of an issue. I think Ten Hag, if he was sat here now, would tell you that he's a little bit disappointed in the timing of it because he's been sacked after they were beating at West Ham, courtesy of a penalty that we've subsequently learned shouldn't have been given. But then after that, you've got Leicester in the League Cup midweek, who played a weekend team. You've got a relatively winnable Europa League game. You've got Leicester in the league. They are the kind of games that managers look at to think that they can turn it around. But if you're coming at it from Barada's and Ashworth and Wilcox's point of view, if you've already decided that you're going to sack the manager, you probably can't risk this is going to sound silly in this but you can't risk him winning those games because then he builds momentum and you've decided that you're going to sack a manager who's now winning games, and then what do you do timing-wise?
It's the cup final all over again.
It is. So I'm not suggesting for a second that they wanted to lose at West Ham, but losing that game at West Ham makes it easier to sack Ten Hag. You give Ruben van Nistelrooy 4 winnable games, or 3, and then Chelsea, which you got a decent result at, to kind of steady the ship, and it gives you time to land on Amorim, sort out everything you need to sort with Amorim, and get him in during the November break. So in terms of timing, the way they've gone about the business, how they've kind of targeted Amorim, having done their due diligence over a few different managers, I think that Barada in particular deserves quite a lot of credit for that.
I was told by somebody close to some of the players that Ten Hag was gone regardless of what happened at West Ham. Now, nobody at the club will confirm that, but the die was cast. Whether they won, lost or drew, he was gone, and that the wheels were already in motion. So the VAR penalty that shouldn't have been given, that was given, that may look like the decision that cost Ten Hag his job, but ultimately I don't think it was.
I think it's hard to sack a manager after a win, regardless of whatever's happening around it, and whether it's on the back of a really poor run. If you let that manager have that game, to sack a manager after a victory, I think is really tough. Just optically is really tough. So again, not suggesting that United wanted to lose that West Ham game, but it gave them a clear opening to execute a plan that was clearly already in place from that October break.
One of the things I come back to when we think about Amorim is that briefing that you talked about. Was it before the Spurs game with Ashworth?
Liverpool.
Was it Liverpool?
Yeah.
And I remember you saying at the time that the sort of feeling, I don't know how much you can talk about this, but I remember the feeling was that they were sort of backing Ten Hag, but also making it quite clear that he wasn't their man.
Yeah, so we sat down with Barada and Ashworth, so the first time that we got to speak to them on the record, they were obviously on tour, but decided that they weren't going to do anything on tour in the States because they were still kind of learning the ropes, which is completely fair enough. We spoke to them before Liverpool. What they had said that kind of caught people's attention was that people asked about Ten Hag's contract extension. You've decided to trigger the extension in the summer. So not only have you decided to stick with him, you've extended his contract. Now, in the same breath of both Ashworth and Barada saying, oh yeah, we think Erik is our guy, they both independently said, but just to make it clear, that wasn't our decision. That decision was taken in June and we started our new roles in July. So no one asked them that directly, but both of them independently said, let's just to clarify, we didn't make that decision, to kind of distance themselves. And it did feel at the time that they were kind of laying the groundwork for them to say, well, he was never really our guy in the first place. It wasn't our decision. We've kind of come in post that, and now we've decided that we need to move on. So there was a little bit, they distanced themselves basically.
New regimes don't keep managers generally. When they come in, they tend to move people on. And it's been funny because nobody at the club has really wanted to own the manager situation, because obviously Ashworth and Barada were making it clear that he wasn't their guy. So Jim Ratcliffe didn't want to be the guy that said, yeah, it's my decision to get rid of the manager. Dave Brailsford's been in the background, not really having a say in anything, but nobody's been strong to say, I'm in charge, this is what we're doing about the manager. It's all just come about, and it's, nowadays they're all kind of owning the Amorim appointment because everyone's getting excited about it.
But just on that point though, that because I remember we talked about it on the podcast at the time, that that set alarm bells off.
Yeah.
When we were talking about, well, yeah, they're sort of backing Ten Hag, but doing it sort of very half-heartedly. How much do you think, if they were saying that to journalists privately, how much do you think that permeated the playing staff, the coaching staff, the club, and kind of undermined it meant that United were just sleepwalking into the first couple of months of this season because they knew really that the manager was a dead man walking.
And I think that probably was true beyond the cup final. The players, the staff, everyone got that sense that Ten Hag was going to go after the cup final. Obviously, beating City was a shock. But even in the weeks after that, there was still a sense that they've left it so long that surely they're going to make a decision and sack Ten Hag and move on. And it just never came. And I think that carried on all the way through the summer. People read into the change of coaching staff in the same kind of way. The players, certainly some of the players, felt like, you just said there, like sleepwalking into the season with a guy who it felt like the decision had already been made. And I think the event since then has proven the point.
There were times, certainly team selection, that it looked like Ten Hag knew that he was going, and he was either trying to accelerate his departure or trying to just come up with something some strange scenario to save his job. Mazraoui playing as a number 10 against Fenerbahce, that was a really strange selection. He wouldn't play Ugarte in consecutive games. It was like, well, they've signed this player that everyone's talking about the solutions to the midfield, and he wouldn't play him. Now, he wasn't a sign that Ten Hag pushed for, we know that. Højlund as well, he didn't really give enough game time to. He wasn't giving players enough time to get themselves fit, to get themselves in form. It was almost like there was a sense that it felt very temporary, very kind of, ready to blow up. And that's what happened in the end. There was no consistency in the squad, in the team. I think the players knew that he was on his way out. And that's what happened because, the performances never really picked up from anywhere close to the level at the end of last season.
No, the one thing I would say, I genuinely think that Ten Hag was surprised because he turned up a week before the West Ham game at the football writers' dinner in Manchester. And he stayed longer than he should. And he was chatting to journalists afterwards, after he gave that speech. He talked about wanting patience and the club where everyone was on the same page. There's a couple of us that spoke to him privately on that night, and it genuinely felt like he thought that he was going to get that time. And I don't know whether he's a fantastic actor or whether he was just kind of saying that to kind of keep up appearances because he didn't know how long he was going to last. But that night, speaking to him, he genuinely sounded like a guy that thought he was going to get time. And I think it probably did come like as a bit of a surprise to him when he got the call, because even now, you speak to people around at United that work quite closely with him, and he was still saying right until the end that he thought that he could turn things around. And that's why I think it will be a little bit of a disappointment to him that he didn't get that run of what he felt was winnable games, because he genuinely felt, I think, that he could do it. Obviously,
that explains the character flaws that people at the club will talk about with Ten Hag, that they just couldn't get through to him. At times, he didn't realise the magnitude of the job he was in, the decisions that he was making. He didn't grasp the size of the club, and he didn't read the messages that were coming. The kind of subliminal messages that you see from what an owner would say or what the players are saying. He was very kind of stubborn, very kind of insular in many ways, and he would only kind of focus on his own thing. He wouldn't look at the bigger picture. He was kind of lost within his own little world, and he didn't see it coming when he should have done, because when you get your job, when you keep your job on the basis of a 2-week kind of delay in the summer, you must know that you're on borrowed time. But apparently he was just such a strange, stubborn guy that he didn't see it.
It's interesting on that, because there's a sense at United that United managers end up getting sacked for the reasons that they get appointed. So Mourinho was brought in to instill discipline and kind of get grip of the dressing room, but it went too far. Players hated it, and then he had to go. Solskjaer was brought in to kind of lighten the mood and be the fun guy, which worked for a bit, but then it was too fun and he didn't have a grip of the dressing room, and then he went. Ten Hag was hired because he was there to instill discipline that they thought had been allowed to sort of slip and be stubborn. And in the end, it's cost him his job. And on the back of that, you then gone and hired Amorim, who people at United are openly saying one of the reasons why they've looked at him and hired him is because he's this kind of arm around the shoulder, I'm your mate, I'm going to get the best out of you kind of guy. Hopefully we're not having this podcast in 2.5 years and he's been sacked for that very reason.
But have you seen the posts on social media today? Marcus Rashford, great day of training. The images of him and Amorim on training. There's a couple of other players as well saying, Casemiro, great session today. Kind of pointed references, because they were two of the players that Ten Hag didn't get the best out of, fell out with. And, his training methods were, again, very kind of hard for the players to enjoy. Now, as soon as the new guy comes in, obviously, it's the new boss, you have to please him. But the fact that, Marcus Rashford will not come out and praise a manager without reason these days, because he's, everything he says and does is kind of measured. And the fact that he said great training session, he's very pointed at the fact that it wasn't a great training session to Ten Hag.
Well, he was a technical Ten Hag. People at United said that Ten Hag was a technical coach. That everything was instruction. It was very straight. It was very kind of, you do this, you stand here. This is the drill. Whereas Amorim, apparently from people who've worked with him at Sporting, is a lot more kind of, we're here to kind of enjoy it. If you enjoy your football, that's how you get the best out of players. And I'm going to be here to kind of make it fun for everyone. Obviously not fun within boundaries, but a lot more fun than perhaps the players had with under Ten Hag.
Well, this sort of lends itself to the latest kind of mood music coming out of the club, which is about January and the lack of money that's likely to be available, on the basis that the hierarchy seem to feel that there are a lot of players, the young players there, who can improve and show much greater levels than what they have done already. How much of that is PR spin? How much of that do you think is genuine, that there is a lot of untapped potential in that squad that can improve?
I think it's probably a bit of both. The financial problems are well documented, and they are going to get worse because they've got a £2 billion stadium to pay for. Arsenal went through something similar, didn't they? Spurs as well. There's only one pot of money that you.
I thought we're all paying for it. the taxpayer money coming through.
Well, I think that's what United are hoping for. But there's only, you can't spend $2 billion on a stadium and then spend £1 billion on players. So there is going to be even more like a tightening of the belt in terms of transfers. On the back of that, then you say, well, Amorim's been told that he has to get the best out of the squad that he's inherited, that we feel that obviously Erik ten Hag had his deficiencies, that's why we've got rid of him, but there's a little bit of onus on the players now that we feel that the players, there's more to get out of the players than we've been seeing in the last sort of 2.5 years. So it's Amorim's job to get the best out of what he's inherited. There's not going to be 100 million to spend in January. There's not going to be a massive amount to spend next summer, even though he's a guy who's going to come in and change the tactical setup of the team and presumably need different types of players for the system he wants to play. It's going to be his job to find what he needs in that group that he's got now.
And on that, to be fair, I think we have to give Ruben Amorim some credit here, because in the games that he coached, United got better results. And I think it was evident against Leicester in his final home game. Right from the start, United played on the front foot. They were very kind of proactive, and you didn't see that under Ten Hag in his final days. They were very cautious, very very scared almost. So Van Nistelrooy is able to put more confidence in the players, more belief. And some of the players that hadn't performed under Ten Hag have started to play. And it's just the freedom of a new coach coming in with newer ideas, just freer ideas. So I think there is scope for that squad of players to improve. But I think ultimately, the squad of players he has, Amorim, will not suit his formation. He really needs Luke Shaw to get fit, but to get fit and to stay fit, which is a problem, as we know. He needs Marcus Rashford to rediscover his best form, which again, can that happen? I think it might under Amorim, but I don't know where he plays in that system. It needs to somehow wave the magic wand over Rasmus Højlund that he waved over Victor Gyökeres at Sporting Lisbon, because he transformed the Championship striker into the hottest property in Europe. Højlund's younger than him. He's got a big reputation, so maybe that can work. But obviously, his job as a coach is to make that squad better, because there will not be any spending in January. I think we can address that now. I mean, Victor Gyökeres, there's a lot of noise around him at the moment. I think it's kind of convenient speculation. He's, it's international break, and he's the guy that Amorim transformed. But there's no way that United are getting him in January. And I think that even next summer, £80 million release clause, I think United have got different areas they need to address. And I don't think Gyökeres is a player that United will get.
No, and they've already spent 30 odd million quid on a centre forward in the summer in Joshua Zirkzee, who is
not centre forward or not on number 10.
Yeah, he wasn't played well. So there isn't the money there to rip up the squad. And I'm sure that Amorim will look at what he's got and think, well, I could do with more of my type of players. He's just not going to get it. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why he's got the job. You mentioned there about the list of clubs who have been interested in him. None of those picked him up, clearly. He's a very ambitious guy. He is looking at where his next step is. If it's not going to be Man United now, then where is it? He probably doesn't want to spend the rest of his career at Sporting. So he's having to compromise. He's having to compromise with the personnel, the transfer budget, the time of the year he's coming in for that step up, because it's something that he wanted to do.
The concern, though, is that his preferred system, 3-4-2-1, 3-4-3, that kind of shape. I was reminded of Thomas Tuchel when he tried to do that. Did that very successfully at Chelsea. But it kind of unravelled at Chelsea because of the fullbacks getting injured. And he used to talk all the time about Reece James and Ben Chilwell being the absolute transformative players in that team, that, if I don't have one or either of those players available, it just completely kills the system. United don't, that's not a squad they've got a lot of wingers, but not a lot of fullbacks. So who are, I mean, I know you mentioned Luke Shaw already, but is it Shaw and Dalot? Is that likely to be the two that fill those really key positions in that system?
You've got Mazraoui as well, who I think until Shaw gets fit, I think Mazraoui plays on the left, which is not an ideal scenario. Dalot, I don't think defensively is good enough, but he can get up and down the pitch. I mean, Harry Amas, he's 17, and he had a bit of a run out in the summer tour, but he's not appeared since. But, we know that Amorim plays young players if he thinks they're good enough, and he could solve the left-sided problem. But that is a big leap. But I think, looking ahead to the game at the weekend against Ipswich, his first team, I'd imagine it'll be Dalot on the right and Mazraoui on the left, because that's what he has, and that's what he has to work with. Unless he does something, left field like, Mason Mount or...
I think that's the interesting thing, is whether you talk about those wing backs and you immediately think that the full backs can do that job. He could do something left field like, say, with Garnacho. Now, Ten Hag thought that Garnacho wouldn't track back, and it was a bugbear of his with Garnacho for ages. But maybe Amorim looks at that and thinks, well, what you get from Garnacho attacking-wise, it's worth having that lack of defensive responsibility and try and sort of instill that in him. I guess when you're looking at a tough game, a first game away at Ipswich, it would be a massive risk to play Ahmad there or Garnacho there or even a Rashford there, and you probably are better off in the first couple of weeks of the season of your reign, to play fullbacks, because it's less of a risk, isn't it?
What message does that send, though? We're talking about a squad that's been inhibited, that's been safety first, that's been cautious. What message does that send if Amorim in his first game effectively compromises the way he wants to play?
Well, he might have to, because the players he's got, it is like, a jigsaw puzzle with the wrong piece of the jigsaw, isn't it? He has to make it work the best he can. And, Ipswich away, there's no easy game, is it? Ipswich away is a tricky game because Ipswich have now won a game. It's Kieran McKenna who wants to prove something against United. Liam Delap is scoring goals up front. It's an awkward game, that. So how much do you tinker having, on the back of an international break as well, where you've not had any time to work with your players? I mean, I think Lisandro Martinez came back early, but at best he's had 4 days to work with the players. So what do you do? Do you say, right, we're 3-4-3, make it work, or do you say, well, I'm going to go for a back? You're right, his first game he has to, deliver a message. And if he goes to the back four, it's like, hang on, you're 3 at the back.
Well, I mean, I don't want to labour the Tuchel comparison, but I remember when he came in and he replaced Frank Lampard, and we had one session, he had 1 day's training. Chelsea played Wolves at home. They drew 0-0, and everybody was very critical of it. But they went to 3 at the back, and they dominated the ball, and they were playing all of these kind of short passes. And you thought, if he can do this in 1 session, imagine what it's going to look like in 3, 6 months, a year's time. And obviously they ended up winning the Champions League. I'm not suggesting they're on the same trajectory, but you can make an impact with 1 session. Now, you'd argue that Chelsea's squad was a lot better balanced, had a lot better quality in it than maybe Manchester United's have got at the moment. But I know what you mean about players coming back, but he's going to have this week to work with them. There is a bit of time, and they're not playing till Sunday. It's not as if it's a Saturday 12:30 game. They have got a little bit of time to work on it. I think if he's got to go in and make a statement, I think he's got to back himself to go and turn this team into what he wants it to be straight away. And if that means making some bold choices, then so be it.